Okay, we've come to the final section of the course of the book, and you can see it's called The Transformation of Article 1.8. This is continuing our study of the constitutional change so that the power of the federal government has expanded beyond the limits that people used to understand it to have. We focused in the previous activities a lot on the 14th Amendment and how that was used to increase the power of the federal government. Now we're going to focus on Article 1.8 and the way that its limits were, that the federal government went beyond its limits and as traditionally understood in 1.8. So this is going to begin in Activity 70 with the progressives. This goes back to the earlier part of the 20th century when people started thinking maybe there were new ways of doing things. In letter A of Activity 70, you see statements by Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. In the President Roosevelt quotation, you can see he's focusing on the colossal combinations of business as something that's dangerous and to be feared, and there's an evil side of corporations that we need to be protected from, and that's no doubt true. Just as there's an evil side of people, there's an evil side of corporations, who are people working together in a business. But here what we're starting to see with the progressives is a rejection of the idea that there's an evil side of government that needs to be feared, or a losing sight of that perhaps. I'm not sure what the best way to put it is. So the focus in the Teddy Roosevelt quotation is we need to increase the power of the federal government because there's these dangerous corporations out there, and we need the federal government to protect us from them. And so the shift of danger is the dangers now not so much the evil side of government as the evil side of corporations. And you can see also in the Woodrow Wilson quotation in the second bullet of letter A, this focus on the federal government lacks strength. So there's a desire to see a more powerful federal government. And then he says because its powers are divided, so the division of the power of the federal government is seen as a source of its weakness, as opposed to the checks and balances that the founders of our system had in mind. The division was to a great extent so that one part of the federal government could stand in the way of another part to prevent it from doing evil. So here that's just seen as a loss of source of the weakness of the federal government rather than a system of checks and balances that would protect us from the evil side of government, which I have always drawn something like this. So one of the things that protected us from the evil side of government was this division of power, the three branches of the federal government. Now in letter B, you can see that Wilson, what he has in mind is especially increasing the power of the president as the single leader who's going to direct the actions of the federal government. He also saw the lack of a clear leadership as a source of weakness. So he thinks that for an organization to be effective, you need one leader, and that should be the president, or could be the president, as he describes it in letter B. He believes, you can see at the end of that quotation, that the people in the United States, as he sees it, we crave a single leader, and he sees this as eliminating the problems caused by checks and balances, because if the president can get the people behind him and have a position that takes the imagination of the country, as he says, then no one will be able to stand in the way. He says, no other single force can withstand him. No combination of forces will easily overpower him, etc. And so again, getting rid of checks and balances so the federal government can do a lot more things, which he's seeing the federal government as a source mainly for good or only for good potentially. And so we need to take away the limits, take away the bounds so it can do what he thinks it needs to be done. You can see in letter C, just for contrast, what a rejection of the founders' position this is. Madison in letter C, in the famous passage from Federalist 51, says, if angels were to govern men, you wouldn't need controls on government, whether internal controls like checks and balances or external controls like freedom of the press, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to vote, etc. But since people are not angels, we're not ruled by angels, and there's an evil side of the people that rule us, we need those checks. So checks and balances are necessary within the system. So just to see that Wilson is rejecting that position, and the progressives in general, to this day, are rejecting that position of the founders. Progressive has a sense of moving forward away from the past, and what it means here is moving away from the vision of the founders. And it's really for you to decide as students which seems to be the better approach, that of the founders or that of the progressives. You can see in letter D that when people pointed out to Wilson that this was potentially dangerous, he did have a response. He said that the people, in my vision, who are going to come to power will be people with clean hands and a pure heart, and that when you put a lot of power into one person, that person will become a better person. He speaks of the purifying influences of centered responsibility. So if there is any danger from the evil side of government, then that can be eliminated by just giving a lot of power to one person, and then that evil side would disappear and it would become angelic. So this may not be true, it's just something that you need to think about, but this is important to start out with because people like Roosevelt and Wilson are the forerunners of people like Franklin Roosevelt. So the really significant transformation of our system has its beginnings here, but doesn't really start until the 1930s, and that's what we're going to go into in the next activity, Activity 71.